A decision to apply sovereignty should be up to the people of Israel. Iran appears to be playing games with the U.S. and the Gulf states. And no matter who becomes the next U.S. president, trees we've just planted here in the mountains of Israel should outlast them. This and much more here on the Joshua and Caleb Report.
In a world plagued with anti-Israel propaganda, Hayovel presents the Joshua and Caleb Report, a positive voice of truth straight from Israel's heartland.
In a world of negativity and fake news, every Christian should be connected to the life and positivity that Israel brings to the world. I'm Luke Hilton, here with Joshua Waller, deep in the biblical heartland of Israel on the Mount of Blessing. Thank you, everyone, so much for all the feedback, for the comments, for the shares, for the listens. I've been blown away the last couple weeks. The show, I don't know if it's the elections or what, but lots of you guys out there watching and subscribing. The YouTube channel, well over 10,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. If you have not had a chance yet, now's the time. Go down there and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell while you're at it. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, if it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, whatever it is, go ahead and subscribe. Completely free. Leave us a comment, leave us a rating on whatever platform you listen to. And we'd love to hear from you, whether it's on YouTube or whether you reach out to us. Yes, we do give out our email addresses. It's luke@hayovel.com, joshua@hayovel.com. We would love to hear from you. We are in a transition time right now, Josh. It's kind of exciting and sad at the same time.
That's right. I was going to say it's an emotional week this week, and everybody thinks that we're about to talk about the elections, but no, there's actually more things, maybe more emotional than the elections.
What elections?
I don't know. This week,
we're not. We're not here to declare who the winner is either, right?
Yeah, right.
We're not going to join the
bandwagon. Why are all
media outlets out there,
news agencies around the world, deciding who the president? Like they're all claiming.
Yeah, I know. I still haven't seen an official source saying that someone has won the presidency yet.
CNN's not official for you.
Not really. Right. I don't know.
So anyway, we're not going to take that liberty to go ahead and tell you guys.
We're going to wait and see what happens.
Right.
We will talk about the elections a little bit, especially as it pertains to Israel and the Middle East, because that's kind of what we're here for. So.
That's exactly right. Something else that's a little bit sad for us is that we've had 70 volunteers that, through a miraculous chain of events, were able to come into the lockdown Israel. Remember that 3 months ago?
Israel's still locked down, by the way.
It's still locked down now. We're talking about starting to lift those lockdown restrictions here in Israel, hopefully soon.
Well, hopefully outsiders will be able to come into Israel soon, too.
You know, hopefully the first good festive season of Hanukkah here in Israel will be lockdown free. Let's just start praying for that. That'd be amazing.
About a month away. So
one
of my favorite holidays here in Israel, and I'd love to go outside without a mask on.
No, really. So anyway, what's kind of emotional for us is we've had this team here. It's like a family for the last 3 months, and these guys are leaving tonight and tomorrow. These guys have done an amazing job. We've harvested 385 tons of grapes off the mountains of Israel.
A lot of tons.
Huge amount of grapes. We've also planted 2,000.
Saved the grape harvest, by the way.
Yes, completely.
Literally, because the farmers didn't know what they were going to do. So these volunteers came and saved the farmers.
Yeah, it wouldn't have happened without these volunteers. Just think about 385 tons of grapes to fall on the ground. This just was the only way to make this happen. So the volunteers really saved the day for the farmers of the mountains of Judea and Samaria. The other thing they've done, Luke, is that absolutely this is one of the
It's new for us too. Yeah, so excited.
To my heart is the Greening of Israel. And we've got a Greening Israel project, and these volunteers have planted 2,279 trees to be exact.
Just to be exact.
That's a lot of trees, and it's covering a huge area. And it's not only like pine trees, and that's what's famous here in Israel, but we're talking about a native forest, biblical native forest.
Which is a groundbreaking project, which I think you should explain a little bit, because no one has done this before in Israel. And you're probably thinking of JNF, which we're connected to, and we're actually looking forward to working with in the future here in Judea and Samaria, because they've planted hundreds of thousands of trees all over Israel, but they haven't been so much in Judea and Samaria. And now they've come to us to start partnering together. But our project is a little different because we're planting indigenous trees, like what the forests of Israel that are talked about in the Bible that were here 3,000 years ago. One of the early books of the Bible talks about the forest of Ephraim. So that was here 3,000 plus years ago. Yeah. Like, we want to get back to that, right?
Yeah. And that's what we're here for. I mean, Luke and I, we get on the show and whatever, but actually my fingernails are still dirty. Like,
yeah. I got out there a few times. I got rained on, so now I can claim,
So really our heart is, and Luke, this is what I want to read, is this chapter right here, Psalms 102. This is one of my most favorite chapters in the entire Bible. But let me tell you, this connects to everything. It connects to what we're doing here in the land of Israel. It connects to the big picture going around the world. And that's what it says. It says, Psalm 102:12, it says, "But you, O Lord, shall endure forever in the remembrance of your name to all generations. You will arise and have mercy on Zion for the time to favor her. Yes, the set time has come." And this is what I find fascinating, Luke, because it says the set time to favor her. Like, okay, what's the set time? And then it follows up with what the set time is. It says, "For your servants take pleasure in your stones and show favor to your dust." So literally.
Question: does taking a pick and digging out holes for trees in a valley on the Mount of Blessing and moving the stones out to make way for the trees, does that count as taking like pleasure in her stones?
Absolutely. Because if these guys...
Because it's making way for the restoration.
That's right. These guys, it's literally favoring the dust and stones of Israel. This is what this group has been doing for the last 3 months.
We're talking about hard work. This is no touristy thing where you're putting a tree in the ground.
No.
We literally dug 2,279 holes, moved probably 4 times that many rocks.
Unbelievable amount of rocks.
Made roads, cleared sticker bushes.
Yeah.
How many tons of mulch do you think we've, or truckloads?
Tons and tons of mulch, which has been an amazing
down mountainsides, up mountainsides, wheelbarrows, pitchforks. Planted that many trees.
If this is successful, it's going to revolutionize the way Israel looks. Just
every tree has a cage around it and mulch around it. I mean, our tree expert has said if these trees don't thrive, it's as much as we could have done, really. Yeah.
Luke, this is what I find fascinating. It says, "So the servants of God show favor to the dust and stones of the land of Israel," right? And then it says, this is the next verse following it is, "By these people doing this," guess what happens, guys? It says, "So the nations shall fear the name of the Lord," and you think that's enough. Okay, just the nations, like me and you, the people of the nations are going to fear the name of the Lord. No, but it goes on more. It says, "All the kings of the earth, your glory." So literally, guys, it sounds far-fetched, these foolish things of the simple. We're just real simple. We're doing really simple things in the land of Israel. But the prophets, King David, could you get any more better than that? King David says that these are the things that are going to happen that are going to change the globe.
And Isaiah says the light is supposed to go forth from Zion to the rest of the world, right? And right now in this political upheaval, the U.S. elections are literally affecting the entire world. Everybody's wondering what's going to happen on January 20th. Who's going to sit in the White House? If it's Joe Biden, it could be a radical shift in American policy toward Israel. We're going to get to that in a minute. But what you're saying is nations or people taking pleasure in Israel's dust and stones, literally what these 70 volunteers that we've had for the last 3 months have been doing, could actually shift the nations around the world to actually fear the name of the Lord, and kings and presidents and prime ministers actually fearing the name of the Lord.
Maybe in the God perspective, in the King David perspective, when he's writing this Psalm 102, maybe it's actually comparison to these 70 people. What have they done?
Yeah.
Maybe they've done as much as Donald Trump could in 4 years for this nation. Who knows? Maybe even more. Maybe even pushed ahead. That, you know what? It's just kind of wild to think like that. But according to the Bible, this is what's happening. Now, I want to keep going here because it says, "For the Lord shall build up Zion." It's a promise that God gives. He's going to do it. He's going to appear in his glory. He says he will regard the prayer of the destitute and shall not despise their prayer. And then get to verse 18. This is where it really gets astounding because it's written for right now. It says, "This will be written for a generation to come, that a people yet to be created may praise the Lord." So right now,
talking about future generations.
Maybe right now.
Could be talking about us.
That's what I think.
Could be talking about, if you're watching in America, you're watching in South Africa, Australia, or Europe, wherever you are, this could be talking about you. If you've been here, if you've been a volunteer here in previous years, if you supported this work, this very well could be talking about you. I think what we're getting down to, and what I've been thinking about, because a lot of people are upset about the elections, a lot of people saying, "Oh no, who's going to be next U.S. president?" We've been out planting trees in the rain, in the wind, in the cold, in the sun, and everything, planting trees. We've just been planting trees. The day the elections everybody thought they were going to find out what was happening on Tuesday, right? We're all out planting trees, and somebody's phone goes ding, and it's like, "Oh, hey, look, Arizona, what's happening there? Oh, Georgia, Pennsylvania." Well, we're planting trees. And reality is, it seems mundane, right? But in the end of the day, these trees 30 years from now are going to be a forest, which is fulfilling prophecy of what once was 3,000 years ago, the indigenous forests of Ephraim, of the mountains of Israel. long after this next president is gone, maybe presidents way down the road, these trees are going to be beautifying and restoring the what once was here on the mountains.
Look, I think the biggest thing is that we can't forget who's in charge. I think a lot of times we zone in and we're like, oh no, it's a leftist regime and they're going to take over the world, and then we forget that actually God is the one in charge of the world. And I want to read this. It says Joel 3. Everybody goes to Joel 3 when they want to know what's happening in the end, right? Well, this actually seems pretty practical to happen now. We're just talking about rebuilding the nation of Israel. We're talking about reestablishing the land, rebuilding the forest. This is what Joel 3, verse 1 says. It says, in those days at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem. Well, it makes you think that now is the time that God's restoring. Like he's brought the Jewish people back, and now he's restoring the fortunes of
We know for
Judah
sure.
and Jerusalem.
It's
It's just happening.
You can't deny it now. It's a fact that the Judah and Jerusalem and Israel is being restored.
So then Joel says in verse 2, he says that he's going to bring the nations, right? He's gathering the nations, and he's judging the nations based on, it says, I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel. So the nations are being judged based on how they treated Israel, and not based on who necessarily who's the president of what country. And that's kind of like the small thing on the background. And really the big thing on the burner right now is Israel, and Israel being restored. Now, everybody knows a verse, John 3:16.
Yeah.
I like this.
Joel 3:16.
Joel 3:16. Just remember that. Okay, now everybody can remember
I
it,
wish I
right?
look up all the 3:16.
Joel 3:16. That's a really good verse, especially right now when people are wondering if Israel's going to survive another day because of the new
Anytime
president
the Lord
in the United
roars,
States.
I'm getting excited because
Don't worry
the
about
Lord
it.
is going to roar here.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. There's a God in the world, and this is what the God of the whole universe says. Joel 3:16. The Lord will roar from Zion.
Wow.
That's
And thunder.
And thunder from Jerusalem. I'm not really concerned that if God's going to roar from Zion and thunder from Jerusalem, I think it's okay. It's going to be okay. And listen, the earth and the heavens will tremble. But the Lord, and then he gets real physical again here, right? The Lord will be a refuge for his people, a stronghold for the people of Israel. This is God. And then he says, then you will know that I am the Lord your God. I, the Lord your God, dwell in Zion, my holy hill, Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be holy. Never again, this is it, never again will foreigners invade her.
Wow.
Just all together right here in the same verse. It's like this is what we're living. We're literally living in the days that these verses are happening right before us.
Yeah.
So,
Well, in Israel's short 72-year history, there's been untold numbers of nations that have invaded her. And they're constantly under threat of nations invading. We're going to talk about Iran in a minute. Yeah. Nations invading her yet again. But one day, the Lord's going to roar, thunder. The earth and the heavens will tremble. And you said, don't be worried. The only thing you should be worried about is whether or not you're facing Zion.
Zion, yeah. Because
whether or not you're coming and supporting what's going on here, whether or not you're financially backing someone in the land, whether or not you're putting something directly towards the land prospering, like planting trees. Yeah. And at the very, very least, praying and facing towards Jerusalem. Daniel faced towards Jerusalem. Ezekiel faced towards Jerusalem. Yeah. Yeshua, our Messiah, he got rejected by the Samaritans just over the hill here because he was facing steadfastly towards Jerusalem.
I know a prominent pastor, Luke, you just reminded me of it, who actually, one way he lived that out of putting Israel first, is a very biblical concept, putting Israel first, is his tithe every month. He put the first of his tithe to go to something to Israel and then gave to other things as he felt it should go. Wow. I think that was amazing. When I heard about that, I was like, that is really amazing. So I'd encourage everyone to do that.
It might sound weird coming from us because obviously we're an organization that facilitates people helping and restoring the land and the people of Israel. But every single person, no matter who you give to, what your tithe and your charity is, something should be going towards Israel. Yeah,
especially as we're fighting a battle.
And you will see God's blessing in your life. It's literally promised.
Yeah. I want to say this, Luke, is that we're speaking right now, we're speaking to 71 million people approximately.
Yeah.
we're talking,
Until we get the vote recount.
Until we get the vote recount and realize it was double that. Not to get into that. 71 million people supposedly voted conservative.
For Donald Trump.
They voted for Trump. So which means they're voting.
Does that count the people that voted for Kanye West?
Yeah, I can also throw those couple 100,000 in there, right?
Who knows?
This means that there's a huge army of people out there that are still conservative. They still, they want to see things
representing at least half of the United States, maybe more.
So I would say that those people are about to get engaged, and they're about to start working double time. This is my
Well, didn't we
encouragement.
see this 4 years ago?
Totally. When Obama was president, what we saw? We saw an all-out army rise up. That not violent, obviously. You know, everybody thinks army nowadays. They think about, you know, going out and protesting.
But people were
or
inspired to take action because they saw the need.
Yeah, they took literal action. How do you take action? The guys, they went out, they came, they put their feet in the business. They came to the land of Israel. They started building up the land of Israel with their own 2 feet. And you know what the Obama administration says? They says Hayuvel was effectively obstructing the creation of a Palestinian state. What I want to say is that's kind of negative. Effectively obstructing.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds negative, right? What I would like to say is forget this whole thing about, you know, Palestinian state. That's not even existent. Let's talk about it real. What we're doing is we want to get 71 million people engaged in building the Jewish state. Wouldn't that be phenomenal? It doesn't matter who the president is. What we've just done is whether the president is for or against or whatever, there's a huge group of people that are still going to be able to do what they need to do. And if that group of people are to engage in this amazing redemption that's happening in Israel, we're on to something. If we can engage 71 million people in this process, which I think they're more likely to engage now than they were when it seemed like the president had it all under control.
Yeah.
Which President Trump did an amazing job. He did great things.
Right.
But we also need the people to get engaged. And that is what I believe is going to happen now. People are going to get engaged in this. You've also got, you want to keep going on elections? We got a lot. We could talk about a lot with the elections.
Yeah.
I'll let you take it.
So we're going to get into a little bit about a lot of speculation, a lot of reporting out there. What's going to happen? What is Biden going to do? What is Harris going to do? What is Iran going to do? Iran's really putting themselves on the map here because Biden has a long track record of really wanting to support Iran. And actually, one of the things I saw very, very interesting is that after the September 11th terrorist attacks, very soon after that, Biden actually wanted to send $200 million to Iran as a goodwill gesture to the Islamic people of the world, to show them that the United States wasn't coming against Islam in the Muslim people.
Right.
So that's a goodwill gesture.
Do you know what that means? Can you translate that really quickly? What that sounds like in Arabic?
Crazy. It's like saying,
Punch me again, please. Like,
yeah.
Like, what do you say when
I
you?
mean, it reminds me of let's give money to the Palestinian Authority so that they can pay terrorists to kill Jews.
Right. Yeah. And supposedly that's going to help the situation, right? Absolutely not. That's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. You also got Harris who pledges that. I mean, we
both
should
of
also
them, but want to get back to the U.S.-Iran deal, and have said they are going to do that if they can. The funny thing is, Iran has said it's not open to getting back in the Iran. They said they missed the boat. So even if Biden wants to get back into the Iran deal, Iran's foreign ministry this week said they would not renegotiate the 2015 JCPOA Iran deal. They slammed the U.S. for violating the deal. They say the U.S. violated the deal, even though who was still trying to build nuclear weapons. Iran violating that deal.
Sounds like more of a problem.
The U.S. left a deal in 2018, and Iran has obviously broken their obligations regarding stockpiling enriched nuclear material. But now Iran's coming out very strongly, and they're playing these games with the U.S. and with Gulf Arab states because they're saying Iran has repeatedly stated that the deal is something of the past and cannot be reopened by anyone because the U.S. violated UN Resolution 2231 and inflicted heavy losses on Iran because Trump has been very strong, slapping sanctions on Iran, and we're going to talk about more that are being worked on right now. And Iran is in a position to demand that the United States be held accountable for its violation of international law against the Iranian people. Again, this is reminding me of a very similar type of situation here in Israel. Now, Iran is trying to negotiate with Gulf Arab states because they're seeing that these partners, they're getting scared. These Abraham Accords, the UAE, Bahrain, potentially Saudi Arabia, are actually allying themselves with the U.S. and Israel. So they're getting scared and they're reaching out.
Well, they ought to be scared. You know why? Because you remember Obama did the same thing. Obama did that with allies, Arab allies in the Arab world. He actually turned his back on those guys and actually went with the with the guys that were not allies. So you know, the Arab world.
And that's what Iran is saying.
See the same
Iran
thing.
is talking to the Arab neighbors, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, warning them that Trump will be leaving in 70 days, but that Iran's regime will remain forever. We'll see about that because if you look at every regime that's come against Israel for the past 2,000 years. Well, 4,000 years, right? Wow. However many thousands of years, they've all faded into the annals of history. So I don't think Iran will be around forever.
No.
He urged, and Iran's foreign minister urged the Arab neighbors to realize that betting on outsiders to provide security is never a good gamble. In Arabic and English, he called for dialogue and to work together. And the message was clearly aimed at Gulf states and others that are partnered with the U.S. And Iran was offering them a leave the U.S., come join us in the future because the U.S. is not going to protect you, especially if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris get into office. You don't know if they're actually going to remain your allies. So it's kind of like a leave the U.S.,
right,
come join us, at the same time telling the U.S., even if Biden gets in office and you want to start reopen the 2015 Iran deal, we're not interested, We're going to do what we want to do because obviously they're counting on Biden to lift all the sanctions, which is another report. Lots of reports going around this week because the U.S.'s special envoy to the Iran, Elliot Abrams, is in Israel this week. So there's lots of reports going around that Trump is planning a huge round of sanctions, actually saying that he wants to slap a new sanction on Iran every week for the next 10 weeks. In case, he doesn't remain in office for the next 4 years, make sure he leaves a good legacy behind him. But no, hopefully tightening down and so that Iran would really be forced to kind of backtrack on a lot of this stuff. And so U.S.'s special envoy for Iran, Elliot Abrams, in Israel this week. He's also going to, now the U.S. is working with Israel to put new sanctions on Iran, but also going to their new allies, UAE, and reportedly also going to Saudi Arabia too, because Saudi Arabia does have interests in pushing back on Iran for sure.
Well, one of the biggest.
And that would be one of the reasons why we might see them allying with Israel in the very near future.
Well, because now the whole deal that Trump got going with UAE, Bahrain, potentially the Saudi Arabia, these guys now pulling them in with Israel, they need Israel if they're going to stand up to Iran, especially with limbo of America. They need Israel more than ever. So that actually pushes this region.
Some people actually think Iran could be within months of nuclear weapons, which is very scary. And Israel's for sure not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
The only way the U.S. could let it happen is if Trump doesn't remain in office, is what I say.
So
there's a lot hanging on all of this. So very interesting alliances and allies happening here in Israel and the Middle East. And reports of Secretary Mike Pompeo arriving in Israel next week, probably to talk about the same things, going around the region, trying to increase pressure on Iran. And Biden, like we know, has pledged to try and reverse Trump's decision of leaving the Iran deal. Like we just saw, Iran might not be interested in doing that, although it's probably a lot of talk.
I think the Iran deal is probably one of the biggest issue at stake here as it concerns Israel and the United States, our relationship as two countries. That's number one, I believe, because if they get nuclear power, that's like they're pointed in one direction.
If people say they're going to kill you, you should believe them, right? And Iran has promised we're going to obliterate America and obliterate Israel. Yeah. They call them the big Satan and the little Satan.
Right.
So it's very real, very scary, and the United States and Israel should believe them.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of people talking about sovereignty and annexation here in Israel as well. On the left-wing side, kind of the anti-Israel side, people are, pro-Palestinian side. They're saying Israel's taking over areas in Judea and Samaria, even though officially they're not moving forward with annexation. They're still building. Well, most of the people that I've seen building are Palestinians in Area C. I mean, if you look out our window and over the hill, we kind of see that with our own eyes. Yeah. But an interesting take, and actually it's not annexation, it's applying sovereign law in Judea and Samaria, because annexation would be applying foreign territory. Yossi Dagan, the governor of the Samaria Regional Council, has said in regard to the question of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley, he said the ball is not in Washington's court. It's right here in Jerusalem. At the end of the day, it's up to us whether or not we build up the land of Israel. We should apply sovereignty right now. With every day that passes, it'll get harder and harder to take that step, obviously referring to the possibility of Joe Biden being the next president of the United States. And I think that's important to note, is that no matter who gets in the White House next, Israel ultimately it needs to realize that it's their own decision whether or not they're going to build up the land of Israel.
And they also have to remember that just like it was in the Obama days, Israel had a very tightened and crazy relationship with Obama, but they also said no. Israel had the backbone then to say no, and they can also say no.
And it's almost harder. I mean, it's an interesting twist, but I mean, under a Trump administration, sometimes it's harder to say no because when somebody is such a strong ally and a good friend, when they do ask something difficult.
And we talked about that incessantly on this show.
Right.
Even under Trump's administration, we were very tight and
because
strict.
you have people like Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt who want a Palestinian state here.
Right.
And they want Israel to give up land and make concessions.
And how do you say no when the person is so incredibly pro? So now this becomes a little bit easier actually to say no when you have somebody that's fairly has a record of being anti-Israel. Right. Come on, look, Joe Biden was Obama's vice president, the worst president in all time history regarding Israel. He's got his training from there, so we could expect that the relationship is probably not going to be that great. And
similar type of thing as Obama, if not worse. It's kind of hard to tell because you got Kamala Harris in there that's a little bit more radical than Joe Biden. Yeah. From a nonpartisan approach, I think we talked about it last week. Actually, has one of the most liberal and radical track records from her time in different political offices.
Which wouldn't be so scary if Joe Biden wasn't quite so old.
But anyway. To finish out the sovereignty question, member of Knesset Bezalel Smotrich of the Yamina Party, very right-wing conservative guy, he said that if Biden does take the presidency, Israel should use these last few weeks and go ahead and apply sovereignty before Trump leaves office.
I don't see that happening, but we could definitely pray for that.
Yeah, we should definitely pray for that.
Certainly pray that way.
A little bit of positive news to end the show. Trump administration, this comes from an official in the Trump administration, has said that Trump will stand by Israel until he leaves office. So whether or not that's 70 days or whether or not that's 4 more years, they have said, quote, "We were elected for 4 years and we intend to take advantage of that time until the very last moment, and we came here to work. We have more than a few things to do with Israel and on Israel's behalf, and we will continue to act." I think that's really summed up Trump's presidency so far, as they've really been people of action. They've gotten a lot of work done. You're talking about the Golan Heights being recognized, Jerusalem recognized, the embassy being moved, the settlements being declared legal. So many good things. I mean, just last week, now allowing funding to go across the green line for projects here in Judea and Samaria. It goes on and on.
Just on that note, a lot of people could be thinking that potentially a lot of these things will be reversed. The Jerusalem embassy move will not be reversed. There's a lot of reasons to believe that can't be reversed, actually. The Golan thing is something to keep watch on. That potentially could actually be reversed.
And then a lot of things here in Judea and Samaria. Very
much so.
To keep watch on.
So stay tuned on these issues.
Guys, again, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform, make sure you do that before you finish listening. Hit the bell here on YouTube. Leave us a comment. Reach out to us at our email addresses. Love to hear from you during the week. In the meantime, be strong, be courageous, and be the voice of Joshua and Caleb in your generation.
I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.